promoting mindful well-being in everyday life. This is the Pragmatic Alchemy Podcast with your host, Courtney Edwards.
Hi, everybody, and welcome back to the Pragmatic Alchemy Podcast. My name is Courtney Edwards, and I'll be your host today. This is the first of a two-part series on the topic of sex. And I chose this topic because I love it, both as an activity and as a topic. It's particularly close to my heart because it's an area of my life that I've struggled with. And it was interesting to listen back to this conversation and hear some things that I said that I don't typically say out loud. And so when I was reviewing the episode for post-production, I actually found myself getting a little teary at some of the admissions that I made to an audience, as well as, kind of to myself. I think in some of these revelations, I'm talking to my younger self who struggled so much. And I think many of us do. I wanted to also talk about this topic because it comes up so frequently in the coaching work I do, in conversations with my friends. It's an area that is full of joy and sensory exploration and embodiment, and it's also got so much heaviness, societal heaviness, religious heaviness, moral heaviness. And so I'm hoping that people find this conversation helpful if they are still in a place of struggle with their own identity as a sexual being. I will note that today's guest, who I will formally introduce in just a moment, she and I are both cisgendered, heterosexual, married women. And so a lot of our conversation does come through the lens of cis-hetero romantic relationships. I guess we talk about what we know, right? That doesn't mean that what we talk about here is only relevant to cisgendered heterosexual couples or folks who identify as cisgendered heterosexual women. But that is the framework that we talk from. And so I think you'll notice that a lot of the conversation is skewed in that direction. Take what you will, leave the rest. I'm so grateful for today's guest. Theresa Hitchcock came to talk to me. At my request, I reached out to her when I was planning this episode. We met through our other lives as higher education professionals working in student affairs. But we both have this interest in working with folks through the challenges they may face. So in addition to being a student affairs professional, Theresa is also a certified sex educator. And she brings that information and that perspective to this conversation. We talk about our identities as sexual beings. We talk about the role of sex in well-being. We talk about mindfulness and how that relates to sex. We talk about how hard it is for caretaking multi-hyphenate women to sometimes transition out of their cerebral selves into their physical selves. We talk about how that can correlate with sexual satisfaction. We talk about masturbation. We talk about the beautiful nature of the clitoris. We talk about parenting and our roles as mentors to future sexual beings. And I know that's a little tricky to sometimes think about our kids as future sexual beings, but they are largely. We talk about obstacles to intimacy. We talk about obstacles to desire, and hopefully give you some ideas about things that you could do if those are areas of struggle for yourself. And then we just talk about, just sort of in general, what makes a healthy relationship and what is the role of sex in a healthy relationship and how does a healthy relationship impact our sex lives. We leave it as the riddle of which came first, the chicken or the egg. So you can decide for yourself and your couplehood if your sex feeds your relationship or if your relationship feeds your sex or both. I loved having this conversation. I'm hoping that you enjoy it too. Let's get started. Hi, Theresa. Thank you for being with us today.
Hi, Courtney. Thank you for inviting me.
Why don't you tell the folks a little bit about yourself and the work that you do?
Sure. I am a 45-year-old woman. I'm pretty proud of that. I am a mother. My son is 17. I won't say his name so he can have his privacy in this conversation. And I'm married. I've been married for 22 years, and I work in higher education. Most of my experience has been in working with students individually, working through their academic experience. But recently, I made a transition to working with students in their residence life and student activities. I'm also a certified sex educator with the OWL program. It's called Our Whole Lives through the Universal Unitarian Church. And I had the opportunity to do that with some people, great people in Louisville a few years ago. And then, unfortunately, because of the pandemic, we haven't been able to meet together again. So we're hoping that in the next few months, they'll start opening it back up so that we can get recertification and everything. But yeah, that's a little bit about me.
Nice.
Oh yeah, and I'm also a baker, and
I was going to bring that up if you didn't.
Yeah.
Yes, tell us about your baking.
So I have my own business, and I'm getting ready to open a storefront in downtown Madison, Indiana, in this spring. So.
That's amazing. It's been exciting to watch that journey unfold for you.
Thank you.
And maybe so the focus of today's topic is going to be sex and sexuality, but to bridge baking to sex and sexuality, I will start this conversation by saying when I was in high school and I was a cheerleader, our little code euphemism for having sex with our boyfriends was that we were baking brownies.
Oh, very nice. Very good.
So it all ties together.
Absolutely.
Your career as a baker and a sex educator. There's the segue.
Absolutely.
For that. So how did you get involved in working as a sex educator? Where did that interest come from?
To be honest, it was a very as most things in my life kind of seem to happen, a happenstance. I was working at the University of Louisville as in charge of training and development for academic advisors, and somebody called me and was like, "Hey, we have enough places for like 5 people to go to this training. Does anybody want to go?" And because it was during academic orientation, so none of our advisors could go, but I didn't have students, I was able to do that. And I thought it would be a really neat way to learn some things to train our advisors. And so I went, and I literally, I think that there's some pivotal moments in my life. And I would say that 2-day training was one of them, because I have a lot of, I would say a lot of shame around sexuality and sex, and had always watched other people be very comfortable in who they are, but didn't have any language. It was something that I definitely did not know. And so I just went ahead and did it, thinking I was going to do it so I could train other people, and really had a change in my language, also in my parenting, and honestly, more importantly, a change in the way I treated myself. And I think that I have benefited from that, and my lifestyle has benefited from becoming a sex educator.
Mm-hmm.
And so that happened I think that was in 2016 or 17. And what I do most of the time with that experience is work with college students mostly on conversations around consent and relationship building and boundary control. Every once in a while, it goes into definitions of gender and sexuality. However, we have people, especially on our staff here, that are much better at that conversation, that students identify with better, but also have more experience and more academic training in that. And also because our students are just so much more advanced in who they are as human beings and the language that they've heard, that sometimes I'm a little bit too novice in that conversation. So I try to keep it more around consent building and relationships, and also just the conversations about what your own needs are in a sexual relationship.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Oh, I love that. So the mission here at Pragmatic Alchemy Podcast is mindful well-being in everyday life. So maybe we could start there in terms of, you mentioned how much you yourself have benefited, your life has benefited from having this foundation. And so how do you see sex and sexuality related to our well-being?
Well, I think that I would compare it to what I wish that we had just in our whole medical experience as humans. And so one of the things I've come to understand after shifting a focus towards sexuality and sex is that I'm actually shifting my focus towards wellness. And so what that has done is by opening this community of people, I've learned yoga. I've finally learned what mindfulness means.
Uh-huh.
I have learned my weight has gone down. Now I've done a lot of work to do that. I've been more active in therapy. And what I've learned is that the same way as we do a discredit to ourselves in the United States with saying that our eyes are not a part of our body and we have to have a separate health insurance for our eyes,
Yes.
or our teeth are not a part of our body and we have to have a separate dental insurance for our teeth. We even have to have separate doctors. Our sexual organs are the same thing. And this idea that the only reason for sex is procreation is so wrong. And then also sex is something that happens to you as a woman is so wrong. Learning those things has really opened up so many more things. And so, on those like TMIs, like, because I started to notice my body and notice what I liked and what I enjoyed, then when I started doing yoga really well, I was like, oh, that's what flexibility does for you, or, that's what, when you strengthen your pelvic floor, how that helps your body, but also helps your sex. It also helps your bladder control. Like, all of these things as a 45-year-old woman is so much more important. And this idea of not taking it, the pleasure and the physical action of sex as shameful, first of all, taking the shame out of it, but also as a part of the whole wellness activities, has been really, really important to my overall health.
I should have put a disclaimer at the very beginning that there will just be way, 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 way huge amounts of TMI in this episode.
Absolutely.
Because
my husband's like the most private person in the whole world, and I'm like, I am totally not. And so that's, yin and yang kind of things. So yeah,
I was like, I was already prepared to over disclose on this episode. Although you're reminding me, I did also intend to ask my husband what was off limits, and I did forget. So
yeah,
hopefully
my husband would say probably 99% of what I say every day is off limits, and we're still married 22 years later. So go figure.
Oops. But yeah, I agree so much with everything that you said. And when you mentioned mindfulness, I had a little internal giggle, because when I work with clients in a coaching capacity, sometimes sex and sexuality come up. And one of the things that I often will talk about is using body scan meditation, specifically body scan meditation, as a method of foreplay. Even if it's just within yourself. Because one of the things that I've learned about myself in the last few years is that I spend a lot of time in my head, and I'm very, kind of always thinking about like what needs to be done, what's on my to-do list, what projects do I have working on. And then when it's time to be physical and sexual with my husband, I have to do something to get in my body, because
Absolutely.
I am so much in my head. And so for a long time, I always kind of just assumed like, oh, I'm just really not all that into sex. And I was like, oh no, I'm just not actually giving myself a transitional moment to like stop hustling and just drop down into the body, be present, and be in my physical self as opposed to just my cerebral self.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think for us, like, one of the things that has changed dramatically recently is like, and I was just thinking about like, what do I do to transition? And when my husband would want to have sex at night, like my mind was was so racing.
Yes.
And now it's like, okay, we will talk, like literally if we end up talking for 2 hours late at night, that's when we have sex, because like, oh, my brain is empty finally. And then, and then like, oh, now I can do this and enjoy it completely and go to bed and actually sleep. And like, that is the best sleep I'll ever get.
100%.
But it's like, if I don't clean it out, if I don't clean out all the things that are in my brain, I can't enjoy it.
Yeah. Well, that was one of the things that we were experiencing was, we would go to bed and we would start talking because oftentimes, we've got kids together. I have kids, he's got a kid. So there's often children. And so that was when we would lay down and we would talk. And then that would bring me into the mood. But then at that point, it's like, 11 o'clock at night and we have to get up for work the next day and we're tired. And so one of the things that doing meditation on my own to kind of get, like, it just helps me condense that 2 hours of talking into just like a couple of minutes, and now we can get busy, because otherwise it was taking me too long in that conversational quiet time to like decompress from my day and get into my body. And so this just kind of is a mechanism that helps it happen quicker.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think I'm just being aware too of where you're, I think one of the things I love about my yoga instructor, she always says, okay, well, look at what is it that you want to focus on today, in your practice. And I think that even saying that too, like, being honest with your partner, like, all right, this is where I'm into, this is what I want today. I want to feel you on top of me, or I want to be, I want to feel in control, or I want to be cared for, or I want this to be fast, or I want it to be slow, or, like being able to say that, like what your focus for that session. Cause right. Why you're reaching out to somebody, even if you can't verbalize it right away.
Right.
But we don't, most people in the world have sex for some type of human connection.
Right. Right.
And so being able to express what that is that you're wanting to get from it is helpful.
Which leads me to masturbation, which I feel like is particularly for women. Like, I remember reading an article a few years ago that talked about how there are very few masturbation scenes in movies featuring women.
Correct.
Right. That there's a lot of masturbation and men masturbating in movies and in popular culture, but not women. And so I don't think that we're equipped with permission, with an understanding of what that can mean and what it can look like and how it can show up, or a recognition of how deeply that can help us get to what you're saying, which is now you know what you like, you know kind of how to get there, and it gives a space for fantasies to emerge, so you can even start to visualize, like, well, what would like my preferred sex look like? What would I want this to be like?
Yeah. And I think that with people who own a vagina, it is like there is so much about the way sex happens to that person. And I will be honest, I'm still really, like, I still use binary language quite a bit, but I try also to not use it. So if you're not familiar, for people who aren't familiar, like the term that's most appropriate is people who possess a vagina, or people who possess a penis, or however you want to use the word possess, or whatever. But because of the fact that everybody, there's sexual identity is a continuum. And I know some of my friends are going to hate me because I butchered all of that, but you all know what I mean.
We're all about the spirit of it here.
Yeah.
Yes.
But I try to be respectful of the fact that there's lots of different ways people possess organs, and internal and external organs. But for me, I, as somebody who has a vagina, I literally did not understand what my clit was until like, oh man, not very long ago. And even when my partner tried to please me that way, it actually hurt.
It's very intense if you're not familiar with it, or your partner doesn't know what level pressure you like. It
absolutely
can be so overwhelming.
Yeah. Yes. And so, I mean, I remember masturbating a little bit in college, but it was always because of the absence of another person.
Right.
And like, so the absence of the partner that I had at the time who was living far away, or, even when my relationship wasn't going well, and wanting to feel some type of pleasure, but it was always that absence of somebody else. And I would say that this training is where I changed my perspective on that. And the idea that, first of all, masturbation is not a sin, which I grew up in the church, and like, and we didn't even talk about masturbation for women. Like, that wasn't even considered even a possibility.
Right.
We know that guys aren't supposed to masturbate, and that's just how it is. But the idea that, first of all, masturbation isn't a sin. And second of all, masturbation isn't something you do because you're missing somebody else.
Right.
Or you're not whole.
Right.
But it is just literally, first of all, understanding your physical body, which, I found out I have a mole on my, like on the inside of my legs. I never, like when I first saw it, I thought I had like I literally thought I had done something. Like I was so scared. I was so nervous. And I was like, wait, I have a mole there. Like it just doesn't, it kind of surprised me.
Right. Right.
And then, but so it's like understanding who you are and understanding, but then also like being able to communicate your own needs. And, and then that changes, what it does is then that idea that sex is something that happens to you goes away, because when I was able to start saying, oh, this is, let's shift a little bit, or, I want this tonight, or I don't, I want to be on top of you, or I don't want to, or like touch me here. And it's like, it's all of a sudden this person who wants to please you is getting so much more experience, so much better of an experience, but that's not the only reason why you're doing it.
Right.
You're doing it for your own release, or your own, for me, it's a mindfulness practice so I can go to sleep, or, all types of different things. It's just another way of taking care of yourself physically. I really truly believe that now.
Yes. I remember I did a series on Instagram last year, I think around Valentine's Day, that started with the premise that orgasms are self-care. Because I really do believe like they're so good for our brain. First of all, like all of the good stuff gets shot into our brain, and all of the happy neurochemicals, great for stress relief and respiration and cardiovascular health and all that good stuff. And I do think life is way too short to just not have as many orgasms as you want. And maybe, partners, I think one of the things that happens is partners sometimes get on different schedules, and it's not necessarily indicative that there's a problem, but sometimes, I think one of the things that can be true for a lot of people in heterosexual relationships, cisgendered heterosexual relationships, is women can kind of orgasm a lot more than some men can. And so then just even understanding like, so he needs a day off. Great. He can have it. It doesn't mean you have to take a day off.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. I totally agree with all that.
Yeah. The other thing I wanted, you were mentioned the clitoris, and I wanted to come back to that because my favorite fact about the clitoris is that it is the only organ in all bodies that has no other purpose except pleasure.
Thank you for that.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's the best.
Yes, it is.
We're so lucky.
Which is also why it is so misunderstood and not cared about for so long, right? Like when so much of our healthcare system is about male-centered pleasure, and it's like, well, no wonder nobody can articulate it,
Right.
Because I remember growing up and seeing I all of a sudden Georgia O'Keeffe posters and stuff, and like my mom would always be like, "Oh, those are so disgusting," and I was like, "I don't even know what they are," because I was never taught to, even though I read "Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret," I was scared to. I thought I would go straight to hell if I put my mirror down there. I was like, no way in the world.
Yeah.
And so like it took me a long time to be like, oh, that's like literally what it looks like. So yeah.
Well, and I think a lot of people don't understand just the structure and the fact that, what is external on a female anatomy, or, somebody who has a clitoris's anatomy is like, just like the literal iceberg. It's the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah.
And that those nerve endings extend down into our thighs and into our groin. And yay, we're just so lucky.
Well, and I also think that that's like one of the things I'd say being a closeted sex person for so long was when the internet finally started happening and being a place where you could go and really find real information. Just the ability to like even look at a real diagram on the internet, because I remember I was like, I gotta make sure I tell you this part. Like when I first started to like I wanted to understand why this thing that I liked so much was so shameful, because I grew up in a church where like I literally wondered every single time if I had sex, if I was going to be like, what if I died tomorrow? I'm going to go to hell, and there's a lot of trauma around that we'll just pack away for today. But I remember one time I was like, I'm going to go in Barnes and Noble, when Barnes and Noble used to be those big giant bookstores, and I'm going to start looking at books because I want to understand this. And it was so shameful. Like, I went to another part of the city and like looked, like, that's how scared I was, and like, dressed differently because I was so scared. And what the internet has done is it has given there's some really good, just general resources out there, but also it's provided the access to different people around the world that like normalize regular behavior that everybody's doing. And some of it, obviously, there's some really dark parts that you can find that are not safe. But just in general, like, I remember reading a blog post about, masturbation and what it means and how do you figure out what you want and everything. And like, I was 35 years old when I read that. And I was like, okay, like, oh, this woman is doing this and she's making it to where I can understand how to do it myself too.
Right. Right.
And it was like, those are things that I just didn't have access to.
Yeah. Yeah. I grew up in a Christian household, although not a conservative my parents were very sex positive, but there was still, like, I remember one of the messages I got a lot as a young girl from my dad specifically was, boys just want to get in your britches.
Yeah.
And that was his exact phrasing. Boys just want to get in your britches. And so then that was very confusing because then it was like, well, if that's what they want and that's all they want, but I'm not supposed to give it to them, how do I get what I want? How do I not be alone? Like, and so like that just, as
and what
well
if I want them
intentioned
to
as
get
that
in
was,
my
it was
britches?
right, like it right. And it was like so very, very confusing. And then I think that was one of the factors that led to me just having like just some really just a really unhealthy relationship with sex and sexuality, that it became I don't know that I dealt so much with kind of the shame like you're talking about it, because like I said, my upbringing was a little bit different, but there was still this idea of it was currency. And pleasure was not a part of that. It was how you got someone to like you, right?
Yeah.
And then that led to not then being able to have really fulfilling or satisfactory sex lives with partners, with boyfriends, because then it was like, well, no, this is to serve this other purpose. It's got all this negative connotation, slut shaming, all that kind of stuff. And so now if I actually like you, I can't do that with you because I like you, right? And it was so twisted, probably until my divorce. And I was 38, I think, when we separated. I got my first vibrator at 38. And I remember Googling how to masturbate. And I saw this great blog post or article or something that was like, set the mood, pretend it's a date, like put on music. Like, what would you do if you were seducing a partner? And then do that to seduce yourself. And I was like, thank God I read that, because it really did help me kind of like understand, like, oh, this isn't, just like jerking off like in American Pie, right? This is like, this can actually
I forgot about the
be a
movie.
really powerful act of self-love and self-knowing and self-acceptance.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I think for me, it was, my challenge was kind of the opposite. Like, I had been told for so long that was such a bad thing that whenever I did, I really enjoyed my first, a person that I dated, and we were very sexually active, and we were very, 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 very good relationship. But I was so struggling with what that meant, and how could I be like, how could this really be love if that was so against who I was told, what I was told was right. And I totally ruined that relationship because of that. And I think both of us were at a place where we were like, this is exactly who we are, and we're okay. Like, we actually really, like, that was actually a very good relationship, but because everybody around us was like, that the activities of sex are so bad and so forbidden. We couldn't understand that was actually a good relationship.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And that's why I try to, like, my son always tells me, stop trying to be my therapist, Mom. I'm like, I'm so sorry.
I get the same. I get the same.
And I was just like, but I just want you to know, like, you can do things or not do things. He's like, stop.
Yeah. Yep.
Like, put over sharing as always, but I think just trying to, like, reconcile all, like, I always hear people always saying, like, you should tell your kids not to have sex when they're younger because they're not ready. And I'm like, well, I'm 45 and I just now think I'm ready. So, like, there's a lot that happens between, like, so even just being like, what is it that you when talking to your kids? One of my best friends always says, ask them if they want the big kid answer or the little kid answer.
Mm-hmm.
And my son has sometimes said, I want the big kid answer. And sometimes he's like, I don't really want an answer. I just asked a question,
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
But I think that, like, being able to, as a parent, saying, like, this is a really complex situation,
Mm-hmm.
like, it may just be something that happens, and also maybe something that has a heck of a lot of baggage, depending upon
Right.
where you're at and where your relationship is and where that other person is.
Yeah.
Is something really important that I would like to be able to, I think that my son has gotten from all of this.
Yeah. One of the ways that I talk about it is it can be up against the bathroom wall in the club. It could be somebody that's your long-term partner. All of it's good, but it's all a contract. So everybody has to agree to the terms of the contract. So if this is just going to be up against the wall in the club, you're good with that? I'm good with that? Great. If you're not on the same page about what that contract should look like, that's when I feel like, all right,
Absolutely.
pause. See if you can find a place where everybody feels good. Because I think that's, like, I'm all about, like, you want to get yours. Like, I'm like, go for it. But I think there needs to be an understanding of, this is all I want.
Yeah.
Versus
Absolutely.
I want this to be an avenue towards something else, or I have these feelings. I think if you can communicate through that, then yeah, as long as you're, not hurting each other, go nuts.
Well, and I always tell my son, like, if you're not willing to have the if you're not comfortable enough having that conversation, then you're probably not comfortable enough to have the body contact either.
That's right.
Right.
That's
like,
right.
I mean, I think that so many people, like, they skip the conversation because it's uncomfortable.
Yep.
It's like, well, then it's going to be a lot worse afterward. There's going to be a lot of the conversations that need to be said that aren't going to be said.
Right.
If you're not comfortable asking somebody to put a condom on or use a dental dam, or use lube or whatever, it's like, then it's going to be more, the after effects are going to be really, really hard on you.
That's correct. Yeah.
So,
yeah.
I think communication in all parts of a relationship are the most important. So
I agree. I also used to tell my undergrads all the time, and maybe once my stepson, around consent, I said, I guess is not a yes. I said her yes, because I'm usually talking to young men, like, her yes should be so loud and enthusiastic that neighbors hear it.
Yep. Absolutely. Yep.
Like, I'm very into affirmative consent, because I think, going back to what I was sharing about my history, my yeses were a lot of, I guess so, like, not really feeling empowered to say no because it was currency.
Absolutely.
Because this guy has what I want. It's companionship, it's acceptance, it's affection, whatever it is. He's got it. I want that. And this is the currency that I have to make that exchange. And so there were times I was like, I don't really want to be having sex with this person, but I don't know how else to get these other things.
Yeah.
And that's a rough place to be in as a young person.
Absolutely. Yeah. And then that, like, the things that we say when, like, I keep going back to one experience when I was, like, the willingness to have sex when you're inebriated versus the willingness to have sex when you're sober. Like, those are two very different different things. And and that consent is not always clear, and not always, it's inebriated. It's, so the ability to say that when you're sober, is much more positive.
Yes.
So I'm all about hypotheticals. So even things like I always I'd like to have conversations. Like my son is getting ready to go to college, and I was like, okay, we're going to have the hypothetical conversation about money right now, because we're not in the heat of the moment of trying to pay for college. Right. And so even things like having the conversation about sex when sex is not a part of the moment.
Yeah.
Of like, these are my boundaries. These are the things that, I won't have sex without a condom, or I won't have, like, these are my needs, or, is if you can make that little bit of an uncomfortable conversation when all the clothes are on and nobody's even close to one another. Sometimes that works really well over texting or something, just because you're not physically looking at somebody. That can make it a little bit easier.
Right.
And if you have somebody who can role play with you, that's even better too. Like, role play meaning a conversation role play, not a physical act role play. And that's what I think that I do a lot with undergrads, is having that conversation. Like, okay, what do you need to say to this person to develop a consent that would work, that would make you feel good?
And practice saying those words, because they're
Absolutely.
hard. They're hard words to say.
Yeah.
Yeah, they are.
Absolutely.
So we've mentioned a few things that can get in the way of somebody really sort of enlivening, living in their truth sexually. So we mentioned kind of religion and some of the constraints of that, and socialized conditioning. What are other things that you see can sometimes trip folks up when they're trying to find satisfactory sexual relationships?
I think, time and place is a really important one. If you don't have, if you're not comfortable in your own space or your own body, that's a big one for me. And I think also just the love of your own body. Like, I think women, because of what we see on TV, as much as we want to say that is not true, that we don't look at it, like, it's really hard not to see that. But surrounding yourself by people who find you beautiful, and that are not romantic partners. One of my best friends in this whole world, Sarah, she tells me all the time, I need you to talk to yourself the way you talk to me, because I think she's one of the most beautiful human beings I've ever seen in this world. But the way she sees me is the same way. And that confidence coming from being around a community of people who believe in you as much as you believe in yourself. But not having that support structure outside of sex. It's not about, you don't have to talk to anybody about your sex life, but it's that ability to know that those people are going to be there, whether or not you want to talk about what happened, or just to talk about the repercussions of that situation. That not having that support structure is really challenging. But I think can be found. I think for women, a lot of times, being a mom can take away from those relationships. And I remember reading a book called 1,000 Acres. It's written by this lady called Carol Shields. And it was a story of this woman who, once her kids went away to college, she left and became a waitress in some truck stop. And this was written in the 80s. And I thought, wow, she's really crazy. She's just gone off the deep end. And now I'm like, oh yeah, I'm literally getting ready to open a business because my son's going away to college. And the reason I say that is I think it's hard when so much of our conversations when we have kids in the house is that it's about their needs and what what's going on, but finding those group of people and that support your goals and interests and stuff that don't have anything to do with your children is a really important community building. But that can get in the way, right? Having kids, the physical aspects of having children and how that impacts our body can take a long time to think through. How that impacts our libido and how it impacts our organs, knowing that my abdomen has been permanently scarred because of the birth of a child, I thought was so disgusting until I was told, no, that's the most sexy thing, to know that that part of your body, that is, that's a beautiful piece,
Right.
And so the way we physically see ourselves is so important. But I think that those things, but then also just those are all time and place centric, right? Thinking about what is it what are my own barriers to just being happy in life, and trying to work through those pieces so that we can enjoy the sex aspect of life.
Yeah, I love that. One of the things that I often kind of sit on the fence about, and I guess I'm curious to get a little of your perception, is when we're talking about like I'm thinking of this through the lens of being a married person, right? So this is, I guess, more relationship oriented than just, hooking up and having sex. But what is the direction that you see between the health of the relationship and the health of the sex? Like the chicken and the egg, which came first? Like, is a relationship healthier because the sex is good, or is the sex good because the relationship is healthier? All of the above, neither.
I think it really depends on the people, though. Right? So I know that I'm an emotionally centric person. I know that 100%. Everybody, not a single person that knows me would say that's not accurate. They can't see me, but my face is bright red, right? I live my life where I think of an emotion first, and then I have to try to harness that emotion into a rational thought to other people.
Okay.
My boss would say that 100%. And my husband, I'd say he doesn't show his emotion as much.
Okay.
And so I'd say for us, when we're willing to, when I feel like my emotional needs are met, I'm very much better as a physical human being. And I would say for him, it would probably be a little bit of the reverse. And so I think, trying to find that middle, I think that's where the challenge for us is. And so I think that it's couple centric, right? So partner centric, and what some people use it as a currency, use sex as a currency to get emotion, but some people use emotions as a currency to get sex. And so I think it is literally a chicken and egg, right? Depending upon who the people are. But I think the one consistent piece is the communication. If the communication is good about I'm not feeling our relationship right now, so having sex with you will make me feel closer to you, or having sex with you will make it feel like you're just using me, is important. And I think that the underlying on all of that is, how are you communicating? Because the communication being out of whack is what's going to ruin both of those.
Right. Yeah, I agree. What are steps? So one of the things that I hear a lot, I should probably, before I just throw a question at you. So I mentioned before, I work with a lot of folks in a coaching capacity, and sometimes relationship stuff comes into that. And I talk to a lot of women, people identify as women, cisgendered, heterosexual women. That's kind of my bread and butter in terms of my coaching, as well as the listenership of this podcast, by the by. We're a lot of identified as women in an age bracket between 28 and 60. So we're talking to us.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I hear a lot is, when I'm doing an intake, I'll say, how are your relationships? If they're in a partnership, I might ask, how's the sex? How's your sex life? How do you feel about the intimacy in your relationship? And I get a lot of we don't really have sex, but I don't really miss it. And I'm always curious how to best approach that, right? Because I'm often of two minds. And I think it goes along with this last point we were just saying, which is, okay, there's no rule that says you have to have a lot of sex in your relationship for it to be a good relationship. And so maybe that's where you land and that's where you're comfortable. But I often feel, given what I have in my life right now, oh no, you're missing something. And I want you to have more of that. So when you're working with folks who maybe are struggling around not the actions of sex, but even just the libido or the desire for sex, are there ways that you work with people to kickstart that if it feels like it's something that's missing for them?
I think the thing that goes to the conversation that we have about anything else, where is it different? So you say, I don't miss it. So was it good before? And you're not doing that, and if they would and so I'd always ask, the question I asked people just in general, whenever they come in and they tell me they're depressed or they're angry or they're anxious. I'm like, is this a common feeling that you have, or is this something new?
Mm-hmm.
And so with sex, I think it's the same thing, right? Like, you're not having sex anymore. I have a lot of friends who, we're at that place where a lot of people are saying, oh, it's just not of an interest to me.
Mm-hmm.
Well, is that something that was ever of interest to you? Because I think a lot of people place way too much of an opinion upon that of sex being of an interest. And I think there's more and more people who are willing to say now that that's just never was a big thing.
Right.
I don't identify that way. That is not how I identify, but there are
Me
some people
either.
who identify that way. And then I'm like, okay, like if that's not a place where you're at a concern right now, then we're going to go to this thing that brought you here. Right. But for the person who says that it is a concern, then I would ask those time and place questions, right? Like, what has changed? Has something changed about you physically or about your responsibilities, right? Because like so much about, especially for cisgender women, is about all of the other things that we talked about, right? Like our to-do list and our family lives and all these other responsibilities. And because those things, and if those things are taking up time, we don't take the time for ourselves, and sex is time for yourself. Like,
right.
That's all it is.
Right.
And so I would say that those would be the things that I would ask first is what's taking up that time.
Right.
Is it interest that like you and your partner are just not spending time together, or is it a physical thing that we can work on?
There's so much there I want to say now. One of the things I wanted to mention, or that just kind of popped into my head when you said that, when you mentioned like sex is time for you, except if we're continuing to tell a story that sex is for him.
Exactly.
And then it just becomes another item on the to-do list, even if your body likes sex. If your brain is telling you a story that it's not for you because you're so disempowered in your own sexuality, then it feels like, oh, this is just another thing I have to do for somebody else.
Yeah. And here's a toy that will help you understand that a lot better. That's what it be by prescription.
Yes. Oh, yeah, I know. I give masturbation as homework all the time. The other thing I wanted to say to that is I have found it really powerful to learn more about spontaneous and responsive desire, the way that it's written about in Come As You Are by Emily Nagoski. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that book. And I will say I've not read the book yet. It's on my Christmas list though. So we'll see. But I listened to her on the We Can Do Hard Things podcast. And
okay, that's where I heard it. Yeah.
Yeah. And she talked a lot about, and this, I might not have these statistics completely accurate, but researchers looked at spontaneous desire, which is this idea of like, you're just like, I'm horny. Yep. I'd like to have sex right now. Versus responsive desire, which is somebody initiates and you say, you know what, that does sound like a good idea. And it was something like 85% of men that were surveyed reported spontaneous desire. Wow. And about the same number of women surveyed reported responsive desire. And I think that that's a really powerful piece of information for kind of the wives and mothers that I talk to, of just like, this could just be one of the ways that sexuality shows up for you. So maybe you don't just ever walk into the room and feel a pang of like, ooh, I want to get laid now. But if you're able to get in touch with, can you get out of your head and into your body? Can you let those feelings arrive? If you create that time and space and you feel that response, can that feel as fulfilling as, this idea that we have that we should walk into the room and,
well,
be turned on immediately.
And like teaching your partner how to take their spontaneous arousal to your responsive, right? So like, if not saying in that exact moment, I want to have sex, but saying, that's where texting can be a little bit of fun, of being like, hey, I was thinking about you today and I got really aroused. And so I was thinking tonight, if I can, make sure everything's taken care of earlier and we can spend some time together, that that emotional carefulness is a lot of times what a woman needs in order to then have the time and space to be aroused.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
Esther Perel says, foreplay starts at the end of your last encounter.
Mm.
And I love that idea because I think that plays into this idea of responsive desire, which is you can't, it feels unfair for one partner to think that they can say, hey, I'd like to have sex. And the other partner's like, sure, let's go. Like that it is a conversation. It's a buildup. It's a relationship. It's a partnership. And so if you're integrating that into all of your relationship, how much does that provide a better foundation for now I'm proposing to you, we have sex. And your partner's already kind of like, that groundwork has already been laid in some way because there's already that connection and it's been ongoing and fluid and not just like on off switch.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. And I think also things like, thinking about it from the person who does have that does the initiation on a regular basis. If they're the initiator all the time and they're continually being told no, then their interest level wanes. And, if they still have a high sex drive, they may find that, they may figure out different ways to satisfy that. But then also as the person who is used to being asked to do it, then, you're not, it's like then all that communication stuff comes back into play.
Right.
I really truly believe that the change in my sex life with my partner has been the communication piece,
right.
The willingness to say, when I initiate and you tell me no, you're too tired or whatever, I'm like, okay, I wasn't important enough for you to take that time to do this, and that's not how they feel, but that is how it comes across. Right. And so I think that communication piece is really important of like, okay, yeah, you're willing to initiate all the time, but you initiate at really, really poor times. So I don't enjoy having sex right after dinner or whatever, like, okay,
right.
then let's figure out times that are better.
Yeah. Mornings.
Yes.
Big fan of mornings. And before you go out on the date.
Oh.
So one of the benefits, so to speak, of being a divorced and remarried person is I don't have my kids 100% of the time.
Yeah.
And his son has moved out because he's 20. And so half the week, every other weekend, we don't have any children in the house. And so sometimes it's like maybe before we go out to dinner.
Yeah.
Because like when you get home and you're all full and you're like, I feel kind of gross. And then you're tired and now you're like, I just want to go to bed. And so, so before dinner can be helpful.
Yeah. I have trouble with sex right before bed because it gives me way too much energy.
Okay.
And so then I'm like, I can't sleep. So then I'm going to go and like, so.
You're going to get more work done.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. What resources, you did mention toys before, which we, listeners won't know, but we've had a bonding experience over toys.
Yes.
Remotely,
yes.
Nobody thinks we didn't have like a date or anything, but we have had a bonding experience over toys. So what resources do you recommend to folks that are maybe trying to work on some of these concerns?
Yeah, I would always highly recommend women-centric websites. Or I feel like anything geared towards women and LGBT community is just a softer, more realistic look at places. And so to be really frank, I'm a Google searcher. So I found this website just recently as I was looking. It's called sexualityresources.com. I'm really curious. Nice. But it's called a woman's touch. And I'm looking at it right now. And it has it actually has a whole thing about sex toys and product guides and lubes and massage oils and all those types of things. I learned that orange cream massage lubricant is like the most disgusting stuff ever. I do not recommend anything flavored.
No,
it's just disgusting.
And I feel like the flavored stuff almost always has sugar in it, and I don't want sugar in my vagina because I feel like that's not a good spot for sugar to be.
So true.
Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, and then my go-to first toy is a little tiny bullet vibrator you can get at Target.
Okay.
They are, if you want to play with your clitoris and figure it out, that is that little $16 toy that does not look like anything when you're and you can go to self-checkout now at Target.
And they're with the condoms, right? Is that?
Yes,
Yeah,
next
they're right
to
with
the
the
condoms,
condoms.
which
Yep.
are, by the way, not next to pads and tampons. I don't understand that. So
I think they're by like vitamins.
yeah, it's like and so yeah, and that's actually where all the lube is and stuff. And you don't need anything fancy as far as lube or toys are concerned. Some of that stuff that they sell in sex shops, like, first of all, it's, if you've never been into a sex shop, it's fun, but they are not geared towards people. Usually they're geared towards fantasy. A lot of like the name brand ones are. There are some in bigger cities. I don't live in a big city. I have only been into a female-centric sex shop once, and it was amazing. The women, there was like a woman. It looked more like a makeup counter than it did the other places that I've been in. And so I would recommend, if you're in a place where there is access to a woman-owned sex shop, it's probably going to be a much more comfortable conversation. But you have to, like, these people don't know you. You're never going to see them again. So you just have to be willing to ask those conversations. But if you're not at that place yet, I would totally recommend that little, I think it's I don't even know what brand it is, but it's just a little bitty bullet that is battery operated. There's some that have, like, you can recharge them. I'm like, I can't remember to recharge my phone. I'm totally going to forget to recharge that. So no, thank you.
Oh, see, I have a couple of rechargeables, and it makes me so happy because I had batteries explode in like one of my favorite vibrators. I was devastated because it was like, I couldn't use, there was battery acid all over the place. Again, I don't want battery acid in my vagina anymore.
Right. No, I don't either.
There, so.
And I also think that, like, one of the things before I would buy a toy is to find out, like, what is to do some self masturbation without toys. And I know that can be very scary. But if you have not done any masturbation, I would recommend reading one of these small little guides on how what to do. And then I know that you mentioned, like, setting the mood and everything. Like, I guess I don't do that, but
I only did it that first time.
Yeah. I
now it's
yeah.
because I was going to give a plug for household items, a detachable shower head. One of the best things
Absolutely
ever.
Yep. Yeah. There's lots of an electric toothbrush is always good in the moment. And I mean, there's lots of rules you'll read about things. Just, think about what you would do with anything else in your body. Be smart. But don't also freak out, because most of those stories are the
urban legend. Yeah.
But I would say that just starting with trying to figure out what it is that you enjoy. And this is going to sound like a really weird segue, but it makes sense to me. I was listening to NPR the other day, and they were talking about traditions and things that, like, holidays, and how some holidays really bring people anxiety. Well, sex brings people anxiety. But think about that one. There's something that you were willing to do. So what is that one thing that you were really willing and enjoying that to be done, and start with that. Right. So, like, for me, it was having my clitoris played with. Like, that is something I never have trouble with, except for, like, once I learned about it a little bit. So I can start with that, and then you can explore from there. So start with what you enjoy, and what you enjoy, and what you're willing to experience, and then build up from there. Because if you go into, getting a butt plug right away, that's not a good idea. Something that is, if you've never done anal play, or if you've never had anal sex, that's not where to start.
Right.
So start with that, and then if you want to build from there, you can. But if that's what you're finding to be enjoyable and gives you the pleasure that you are looking for, you didn't know you were looking for, that's okay to that be all it is too. You don't have to go and buy the one that Frank and Grace and Frankie made on their show. Like, that is a big ass toy, and I would not say that everybody needs that. So.
Right.
Yeah.
A couple things I would add to that. I find going to stores with a friend or friends helps, right? So if you've got a trusted person or two and you can make a little field trip out of it, that can actually, like, because what you're saying, like a lot of them are really geared towards fantasy. It can be really uncomfortable. I don't know that I've ever actually been in any sex shop alone. And I always just go with pals and we make like a girls date out of it. And then it's a lot of fun,
Oh,
right? Because
absolutely.
then you're like sharing notes and you can ask your friends, like, have you ever tried this? What did you find? What did you like? Product recommendations. I also, I had a friend who was doing, I think the brand is called Athena, but they were in-home
Yeah.
parties, and that was great because that felt very safe. And it was just all women. There were display models, so you could touch everything and pass it around. And so maybe you get an invitation to something like that. That might be
Yeah.
a helpful way to kind of ease into learning a little bit more. But I also wanted to, because we had brought it up, I want to make a strong plug for lube.
Absolutely.
Lube. Get lube.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're not sure what kind of lube you like, I try to go for more natural products that don't have a lot of extra stuff in them, but coconut oil works just fine.
Yeah. Yep. Absolutely. And I think that that's one of the things that I didn't understand for the longest time was like when I used condoms for so long is how much lube there is on a condom.
Right.
And so like whenever you transition away from using condoms to either self-play or play with a partner without a condom, like that is, it's not, your vagina hasn't all of a sudden become dry. Like, the whole idea about a dry vagina, and then you're like, oh my God, I'm going to menopause. It was like, oh no, it's just literally like we had this lubricant that was provided.
Right.
And that is something that was like, that's something kind of made me feel a lot better.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that being said, I am noticing a difference. I'm 47. And so I am noticing a difference, and it has now become like, I don't even have to ask for it anymore. Like he just knows, like, grab the lube because, and it really does, like, it makes everything better. Like that's the one thing, like there's times where we would use it because I was like, that hurts. Could you get the lube? And then there's other times where I'm just like, no, we should just default to it because it makes everything feel better.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. And then once again, like, you can do all natural. There's, Target's, got a very cheap one if you need it. So, to get started. So,
yeah. The one that I like is called Sliquid, and it's, there's no additives. It's a pretty natural, product. I do tend to stay away from anything flavored, like we mentioned.
Yes.
There's usually sugar and flavored stuff, and
Yeah.
you just don't want sugar in your vagina. It's just not good. It makes yeast. It's not good.
No. Yeah. And those flavored dental dams, those are the nastiest things ever.
Yeah.
Ugh.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Did we miss anything? Was there anything else you wanted to say before we?
No, I mean, there's, we could talk about this forever. You and I could. I think that, I think just reminding, just like, even though we have been comfortable enough to have the conversation out loud, I think being that you don't have to have that conversation out loud with other people, but being able to have a conversation with yourself about what it is that you want and where you're going in life.
Yeah.
And sex is a part of it is really important.
Yes. That was the other thing I actually wanted to mention too. Just, you were mentioning anal play, and I know, I think one of the things that we internalize kind of these societal messages. And I just have tried to really embrace the belief and share with others this idea of, we have nerve endings all over our bodies. And so that means any number of things can feel good. And there's no right or wrong, bad or dirty, good or pure. It's just, yoga with Adrienne. She always says, find what feels good. Right?
I love yoga with Adrienne.
And this applies to yoga and sex. Like, just find what feels good. And I really truly believe if you're not harming another person, you're not doing anything wrong. And it doesn't, if you like to have your butt played with, then play with your butt, you know?
Absolutely. I think that, we just have, like, it's just like everything else. You just got to put your blinders on. And, we say, you should live your life your own way. And especially in a place when nobody else is seeing it, you should live your life the way that is most comfortable for you. And you don't have to share that with anybody else, or you can share it with somebody else. But just being okay with that is so important.
I agree. So you think
Well,
we got it all for today?
I think so. Yeah. I thank you so much for letting me come here and talk to you about this. And I hope that I was helpful a little bit, and that other people can start to have some conversations. And if anybody needs to reach out to me directly, I'd be happy to do that.
Yeah, we'll put all of your any info you want us to share. We'll put it in the show notes so people can find you. And higher education professionals that are listening to us might maybe have you come in and work with their staffs and students and all that good stuff. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks to Theresa for being with us today. I hope that you found this conversation as heartfelt and informative and wonderful as I did. If you're loving this content, please share it with your people because they might love it too. You can send topic ideas, guest suggestions, questions, or commentary to me at Courtney@shineandsoar.com, or fill out the contact form on shineandsoar.com/podcast. Don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe. It really does help us get people aware of and interested in the show. So wherever you're getting your podcasts, go ahead and follow, give us a rating and a review. We'll be back next week with a brand new episode. In the meantime, take care of yourselves and each other.